Hey everybody, this is Dave. I'm going to repeat a video. This is a video I did with Bryan Jensen, actually about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. It was a very long video. It was called, Is Mormonism a Restoration of Heresies? Now, it was so long, it was like 40 minutes, and I knew a lot of people would have a tough time with it. But I got to be honest with you, it's such an amazing video that I'm going to be breaking up the pieces. So what you're going to see is all these different heresies and heretics that were involved in the ancient church in which they were excommunicated. And what you're going to see next is Bryan explaining these heresies and how these heresies actually were used by Joseph Smith in Mormonism. So many of the beliefs that Mormonism has was from the heretics and the heresies of the ancient church. It's such a good video that I really want you to really focus in on it, but it's so long that I only had 1,900 views. This should have 100,000, 200,000 views. So what I'm going to be doing is piecing up. You're going to see a lot of pieces of different heretics and heresies and how it correlates to Mormonism. It's a very, very worthwhile show, and I'm going to be showing this now, and you're going to do 5 minutes. I'm going to be doing 5-minute sections of each of the heresies. So please watch.
Right. So certainly one of the very earliest movements, and we see this taught within the New Testament, contended in with New Testament, was the Gnostic movement and the Judaizing movement. And so a very prominent, we'll say, take the Judaizing movement. These were the people who believed that Gentiles had to be received through circumcision and follow the Mosaic law. And we saw in the period of the New Testament in through the 2nd century, various movements in this sense. One of the most well-known are what are called the Ebionites, and they believed literally that Christians had to be faithfully observant to the Mosaic law in order to be rightly accepted by Christ. And so they separated themselves from the main body and advocated this kind of
so the Mosaic law was still a lot of the 600 or so laws that the Judaism still had. And they had to participate.
Well, it not only was the Levitical law, but it was even the Pharisaical law to say, here's these 600 some odd steps that you go above and beyond. If you keep those, then you know you safely won't actually violate what is within the Torah itself, because we're sort of hedging off the barriers. And there were divisions, some who held only to the Torah observance and some who advocated what we'd say the Pharisaical or rabbinical laws. If we lump all those together, we would say, well, sometimes a parallel with Mormonism would be that often Mormonism, where it fails to prove the case with an ancient Christian restoration, sometimes leaps back into the Old Testament and saying, well, we're actually continuing on the Mosaic law or the refreshment of the Mosaic laws. We see that sometimes through the Mormon claim about the temple observance, right? They'll say this is a first temple observant carried forward into the restored era of Mormonism. And so in that sense, the Ebionites have a ethos with some Mormon practice, which is to essentially look back to for justifying prophets, for justifying the means of how God reveals. They contradict some of the New Testament teachings that fulfilled this, recontextualized this in the idea of Jesus Christ's messianic reign, right? And so this is an error we have to always correct. Not only Mormons themselves should look at that, but even within the general Christian body,
it's not that way.
It can happen. It can definitely happen.
They sort of go to the, when you look at Christianity, it was not based on the new temple in that essence, but they go back to that and revert back to this old way of thinking.
Yes.
The points that you would
so one thing I would say we want to bring up chronologically too is what I mentioned about the Gnostic sects. And so there's a variety of movements of Gnosticism, and essentially they advocated a special kind of knowledge and I mean, it's hard for many modern people to grasp this, but their main complaint and many complaints among heretical movements in early Christianity were about the humanity of Jesus Christ, truly believing that God became incarnated among human beings. And so we see among a number of Gnostic sects where they rejected the idea that material reality is somehow a fallen world, that it would be beneath God to be among us. So contra New Testament teachings, the Gnostics often advocated a special kind of spiritual knowledge, and through knowing these special knowledge, they would have right acceptance rather than through belonging and adhering to the main faith that the apostles.
And you hear that a lot in Mormonism.
Yeah.
You know, that they have a higher level of understanding, they have a higher knowledge, and we might have some of the meat, but they actually. Like they actually talk about the glory of God as intelligence, and so they believe that they have a higher thought understanding.
Yeah, for example, their temple rite teachings that even among Mormon adherents that are not supposed to talk about it before they actually get received into the temple rites. They don't even know what they're consenting to until they're truly there. That kind of secrecy is kind of a special knowledge, as it were, you know, the signs and tokens, etc. This was existing among the Gnostic sects,
and also
to
the Masons too.
Well, yeah, I mean, this idea of secret society, secret knowledge being passed on, continued on from the Gnostic times through the Middle Ages, even through the time.
And that was not a Christian. That was not how Jesus actually. He wasn't secretive in that way. He was always out sharing the truth out in public. Right. Yeah. So we see a difference.
So in that sense, the Gnostic has some parallels with Mormon secrecy movements. It also has parallels in the idea that Mormons reject Trinitarian teaching of the early church, and they believe a number of things. For example, that God the Father, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit are three separate gods in a long line of gods that descend down through history. And many Gnostic movements had varieties of gods, creator gods versus the aeon gods of which Jesus was part. And so this idea of sort of expanding the pantheon of gods, as it were, has some similarity. Then, of course, in the pagan cultures,
but Arianism also, that was part of it. He didn't believe in the Trinity.
Well, he did believe in not Orthodox Trinity. He did believe there was only God in the Father, Jesus, and Holy Spirit. But yet, because he believed Jesus was created, he denied an aspect of the oneness of God, right? Okay. And so both in Arianism that came in the 4th century, and then in the 2nd century with various Gnostic movements, we see some parallels with the Mormon worldview.